At 6 that evening, Andy was still missing. Governor Norton stormed down to cell block 5. One wit suggested that Andy had poured himself through the keyhole. The suggestion earned the guy 4 days in solitary. They were uptight. Norton glared at us, went into Andy's cell and looked around. It was just as Andy had left it. The sheets of his bunk turned back, but without looking slept in. Rocks on the windowsill, but not all of them. Rocks, Norton hissed, and swept them off the window ledge with a clatter. Gagne winced, but said nothing. Norton's eyes fell on the Linda Ronstadt poster. Linda was looking over her shoulder, her hands tucked into the back pockets of a very tight pair of fawn-colored slacks. She was wearing a halter and had a deep California tan. It must have offended the hell out of Norton's Baptist sensibilities. I remembered what Andy had once said about feeling he could almost step through the picture and be with the girl. In a very real way, that was exactly what he did, as Norton was only seconds from discovering. He ripped the poster from the wall with a single swipe of his hand and revealed a gaping, crumbling hole in the concrete behind it. God, they must have heard Norton ordering Rich Gagne to go in there all over the prison. And Gagne just refused him, point blank. "I'll have your job for this," Norton screamed, hysterical as a woman having a hot flush. Gagne silently held out his service pistol to Norton, butt first. He was 4 hours overtime, going on 5, and he'd just had enough. There were 28 cons listening to Norton's little dust-up with Rich Gagne. Warden Samuel Norton had just passed what engineers like to call the breaking strain. And by God, it almost seemed to me that somewhere I could hear Andy Dufresne laughing. Norton finally got a skinny drink of water to go into that hole. The guard's name was Rory Tremont, and he was not exactly a ball of fire in the brains department. Gagne seemed to be the only one still thinking clearly, dug out a set of blueprints. The wall was 10 feet thick. In the center was a 2-foot piece of pipe. Tremont's lower legs disappeared into the hole. A moment later, his feet were gone too. "Warden, it smells pretty damn bad." Dolorously, Tremont's voice floated back. "Smells like shit. Oh, God, that's what it is. It's shit. Oh, my God, let me out of here. I'm gonna blow my groceries. Oh, shit. It's shit. Oh, my God." And then came the unmistakable sound of Rory Tremont losing his last couple of meals. Well, that was it for me. I couldn't help myself. The whole day, hell no, the last 30 years, all came upon me at once, and I started laughing fit to split. A laugh such as I had never had since I was a free man. The kind of laugh I never expected to have inside these gray walls. And oh, dear God, didn't it feel good. "Get that man out of there," Warden Norton was screaming, and I was laughing so hard I didn't know if he meant me or Tremont. I just went on laughing and kicking my feet and holding on to my belly. "Get him out!" Well, friends and neighbors, I went straight down to solitary, and there I stayed for 15 days. Every now and then I'd think about poor old not-too-bright Rory Tremont bellowing. And then I'd think about Andy Dufresne. Andy Dufresne, who had waded in shit and came out clean on the other side. Andy Dufresne, headed for the Pacific. I guess Rory Tremont decided he didn't have much left to lose after he'd lost his lunch and dinner. What he found at the bottom of the shaft was a master sewer pipe which served the 14 toilets on cell block 5, a porcelain pipe that had been laid 33 years before. It had been broken into. Beside the jagged hole in the pipe, Tremont found Andy's rock hammer. Andy had gotten free, but it hadn't been easy. The pipe was even narrower than the shaft Tremont had descended. It had a 2-foot bore. It must have been damn near unspeakable. A rat ran out of the pipe as Tremont was examining the hole and the rock hammer, and he swore later that it was nearly as big as a Cocker Spaniel pup. He went back up the crawl space to Andy's cell like a monkey on a stick. Andy had gone into that pipe. Maybe he knew that it emptied into a stream 500 yards beyond the prison on the marshy western side. He was a methodical cuss. He would have known or found out that the sewer pipe running out of cell block 5 was the last one in Shawshank not hooked into the new waste treatment plant. He would have known it was do it now, mid-1975, or do it never. Because in August, they were going to switch us over to the new waste treatment plant too. 500 yards, the length of 5 football fields. He crawled through foulness that I don't want to imagine. Maybe the rats scattered in front of him, or maybe they went for him, the way such animals sometimes will when they've had a chance to grow bold in the dark. He must have had just enough clearance at his shoulders to keep moving. He probably had to shove himself through the places where the lengths of pipe were joined. If it had been me, the claustrophobia would have driven me mad a dozen times over. At the far end of the pipe, they found a set of muddy footprints leading out of the sluggish, polluted creek the pipe fed into. 2 miles from there, a search party found his prison uniform. That was a day later. 3 months after that memorable day, Warden Norton resigned. He was a broken man. I believe now that it began in 1949, way back then. Not with the rock hammer, but with the Rita Hayworth poster. I told you how nervous and filled with suppressed excitement he was when he asked for it. The walls of cell block 5 were solid enough, but they weren't exactly dry and toasty. As a matter of fact, they were and are pretty damn dank. After a long wet spell, they sweat and sometimes even drip. Cracks had a way of appearing, sometimes an inch deep, and were routinely mortared over. Now here comes Andy Dufresne into cell block 5. Geology had been his chief hobby. Andy got interested in the walls of his cell. He had time to study those walls, plenty of time. What he found was that interestingly weak concrete. Maybe he started to carve his initials and a big chunk of the wall fell out. I can see him lying there on his bunk, looking at that chunk of concrete, turning it over in his hands. Some months later, he might have decided it would be fun to see how much of that wall he could take out. But you just can't start digging into your wall and then, when the weekly inspection, one of the surprise inspections that are always turning up interesting caches of booze, drugs, dirty pictures, and weapons, comes around, say to a guard, "This? Oh, just excavating a little hole in my cell wall. Not to worry, my good man." No, he couldn't have done that. So he came to me and asked me if I could get him a Rita Hayworth poster. Not a little one, but a big one. And of course, he had the rock hammer. Andy went right through the wall. Even with soft concrete, it took him 2 rock hammers and 27 years to hack a hole big enough to get his slim body through 4 feet of it. Of course, he lost most of one of those years to Normandy, and he could only work late at night, when almost everyone is asleep, including the guards on night shift. He played the game with administrator after administrator, and they thought it was because he wanted to keep the library going. I have no doubt that was part of it, but the main thing Andy wanted was to keep cell 14 in cell block 5 a single occupancy. Andy was a model prisoner, quiet, well-spoken, respectful, nonviolent. In 1950, Andy became something more than a model prisoner. In 1950, he became a valuable commodity, a murderer who did tax returns. He gave gratis estate planning advice, set up tax shelters, filled out loan applications, sometimes creatively. Andy kept up on the tax laws and the changes in the stock market. He began to get his library money. His running war with the sisters had ended, and nobody tossed his cell very hard. Then one day, very late in the going, perhaps around October of 1967, the long-time hobby suddenly turned into something else. One night, while he was in the hole up to his waist with Raquel Welch hanging down over his ass, the pick end of his rock hammer must have suddenly sunk into concrete past the hilt. He would have dragged some chunks of concrete back, but maybe he heard others falling down into the shaft, bouncing back and forth, clinking off the standpipe. Did he know by then that he was going to come upon that shaft? I don't know. He might have found the prison blueprints by then. If not, you can be damn sure he found a way to look at them not long after. Now, instead of playing the game, he was playing for high stake. In terms of his own life and his future, the highest. It was around then that he talked to me about Zihuatanejo for the first time. He'd had the key under the rock in Buxton to worry about for years. Now he had to worry that some eager beaver new guard would look behind his poster and expose the whole thing. He had to carry the possibility of discovery for another 8 years. The probability of it, you might say. The gods had been kind to him for a long time, some 18 years. The most ghastly irony I can think of would have been if he had been offered a parole. Imagine it. 3 days before the parolee is released, he is transferred into a light security wing to undergo a complete physical and a battery of vocational tests. While he's there, his old cell is completely cleaned out. Instead of getting his parole, Andy would have gotten a long turn downstairs in solitary, followed by some time upstairs, but in a different cell. If he broke into the shaft in 1967, how come he didn't escape until 1975? I don't know for sure, but I can advance some pretty good guesses. First, he would have become more careful. He must have gone on widening the crawl space a little at a time. A hole as big as a teacup by the time he took his New Year's drink that year. A hole as big as a dinner plate by the time he took his birthday drink in 1968. As big as a serving tray by the time the 1969 baseball season opened. I guess by the time Nixon was sworn in for the second term, the hole would have been wide enough for him to wiggle through, and probably sooner than that. And he was a small guy. Why didn't he go then? I think maybe Andy got scared. I've told you as well as I can how it is to be an institutional man. At first, you can't stand those four walls, and then, as your body, your mind, and your spirit adjust, you get to love them. You are told when to eat, when you can write letters, when you can smoke. At work, you're assigned 5 minutes of each hour when you can go to the bathroom. For 35 years, my time was 25 minutes after the hour, and after 35 years, that's the only time I've ever felt the need to take a piss or have a crap. 25 minutes past the hour. I think Andy may have been wrestling with that tiger, and also with the bulking fears that all of it might have been for nothing. How many nights had he lain awake under his poster thinking about that sewer line, knowing that one chance was all he'd ever get? The blueprints might have told him how big the pipe's bore was, but a blueprint couldn't tell him what it would be like inside the pipe, if he would be able to breathe without choking, if the rats were big enough and mean enough to fight instead of retreating. A blueprint couldn't have told him what he'd find at the end of the pipe. And here's a joke even funnier than the parole would have been. Andy breaks into the sewer line, crawls 500 yards of choking, shit-smelling darkness, and comes up against a heavy-gauge mesh screen at the end of it all. Very funny.